And from the Indian Country Trading Post on the Lakota Ojibwe Reservation, welcome to this edition of the Native News Update. I'm your host for today's program, Paul Demain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website, www.indiancountrynews.com, where there's a whole bunch of other stories that we don't get a chance to read here as well. Here are the news stories from the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. In absence of research into how influenza behaves among Aboriginals is hindering efforts to curtail swine flu as it ravages Native communities in Manitoba and Nunavut. Even as doctors scramble to fill in those blanks, Native leaders are accusing health officials of ignoring their plight. It has taken way too long to recognize how bad the situation is, said David Harper, chief of the Garden Hill First Nation. Some researchers are consulting history books rather than medical manuals, casting back to 1918, the last time an influenza virus hit Native communities so hard. In that year, the disease wiped out whole villages, killing off up to 90% of the residents in some cases. Utah's U.S. senators say they want Congress to investigate the actions of federal agents who arrested 24 people for the theft of ancient artifacts stolen from public and tribal lands in the Four Corners area. Senators Orrin Hatch and Bob Bennett, both Republicans, told the Desert News of Salt Lake City that the raid was overkill. The two made the comments during interviews at the state's GOP convention this last weekend. One of the men indicted in the raid, James Redd, 60, was found dead last Thursday in an apparent suicide. Redd was a physician and was charged with one felony count of theft of tribal property. His wife, Jeannie Redd, was also charged. Of those indicted, 19 are from southern Utah, 4 are from Colorado, and 1 is from New Mexico. The U.S. government's plans to spend up to $3 million a year to demolish and rebuild uranium-contaminated structures across the Navajo Nation, where Cold War-era mining of the radioactive substance left a legacy of disease and death. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and its Navajo counterpart are from a significant minor waste pile. They plan to assess 500 structures over 5 years and rebuild those that are too badly contaminated. Between the 1940s and the 1980s, millions of tons of uranium ore were mined from the 27,000 square mile reservation that spans Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Many Navajos, unaware of the dangers of contamination, built their homes with chunks of uranium ore and mill tailings. In the year 2000, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization listed Tlingit as critically endangered language. UNESCO estimated at the time that after thousands of years of Tlingit culture in southeast Alaska, there were only 300 fluent speakers left. UNESCO also determined that the youngest of the remaining Tlingit speakers were grandparents who spoke the language partially and infrequently. As a result, twice in recent years, the Sitka tribe of Alaska has listed preserving the Tlingit language as one of its top priorities. For Tlinglits and other native people, language and culture go hand in hand. One cannot survive without the other. The tribe recently launched Phase 1 of a survey which involves gathering information about the number of Tlingit speakers left in Sitka and assessing their ability to read, write, and understand their native language. In a culture that teaches not to revisit suffering, a proposal to memorialize routes that Navajo and Mescalero Apaches marched as they were forced from their homelands has stirred up painful memories. The march in the 1860s from tribal lands to a desolate tract in eastern New Mexico known as the Long Walk led to the deaths of thousands of American Indians at the time. So while the federal designation as a National Historic Trail is supported by some tribal members who believe that healing and appreciation for the resilience of their ancestors will come only through education, memorializing such an event goes against some of their elders' beliefs. Public meetings across the Navajo Nation this week will complete a study that the National Park Service will turn over to Congress. Lawmakers will then decide whether to add the Long Walk to the list of historic and scenic trails within the National Trails system. If designated, it would be the second historic trail to commemorate the forced removal of American Indians in the United States from their homelands. The Trail of Tears that led the Cherokees and other 5 civilized tribes of the southeast to present-day Oklahoma in the late 1830s, was named a historic trail in 1987. On June 11th, university and college students participated in the First Nations Day of Reconciliation that marked the one-year anniversary of the Canadian government's historic apology for the residential school system treatment. Students marched in solidarity with Aboriginal organizations that are calling on the federal government to address the many injustices that still face Aboriginal people across Canada. Last year, the federal government took an important steps toward reconciliation by apologizing to residential school survivors, said Thomas Ruzane, Aboriginal student spokesman for the Canadian Federation of Students. Now is the time to turn words into action. The federal government must address the poverty afflicting Aboriginal communities through meaningful investments in areas such as post-secondary education. According to Ruzane, over 2,500 Aboriginal students are denied funding each year because of the lack of resources. On June 15th, the Wood County Sheriff's Department of Wisconsin took a first step toward becoming a more diverse organization. Wisconsin Rapids native James Pidgeon, 27, a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, became the county's first American Indian deputy. Wood County Sheriff Thomas Riechert said he's pleased to be the first Wood County Sheriff with an American Indian officer in his department. During his first morning as a deputy, Pidgeon was sworn in by Riechert, attended a briefing, filed out paperwork, and had his first newspaper interview. He'll spend several weeks doing fieldwork, training, and getting exposed to all facets of the Wood County Sheriff's Department, Riechert said. Sheriff's deputies officials have been following Pidgeon's career for some time. Riechert said Pidgeon is a former Wood County Reserve deputy, and he served in the Middle East while a member of the U.S. Marine Corps' infantry. Most recently, he worked as an officer in Las Vegas, Nevada. And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update from the Indian Country Trading Post on the Lakota Reservation. We want to thank our underwriters for helping us with this broadcast. Stop in again for the next edition right here soon. Miigwech.